Interestingly, as we discuss as as policymakers and as students of policy, we discuss what should we do about all this power that these information economy companies have. We are using the same framework as rivalrous industrial economies. We are using antitrust. As a matter of fact, several presidential candidates are now saying that they're planning on breaking these companies up should they win the nomination and then the presidency. I'm not against antitrust. I think it's a really important framework. But this work was informed by the idea that perhaps we need to think differently about how we govern and regulate our relationship to data, and therefore our relationship to these large companies. And maybe there are other ways of thinking about it. That was the predicate to this work. So it turns out there are tens of thousands of pages of regulation that have already been written about how we are governed in our relationship to data. But they've never been ratified by us. They've never been read by us. They're called terms of service and privacy policies, and they're ignored by us. How many of you have actually read a terms of service or privacy policy? Well, that's because you're at Columbia. But the truth is that 15 or 20%, while that is way higher than the average, which is about 1 or 2%, is still not high enough. Most of you, I'm guessing, if you're citizens of the United States, or even if you're not, have read the Constitution. Not a hard document to understand, even though it's many centuries old. But just try to understand a privacy policy. It is written at graduate level, so most of you probably could understand it if you wanted to struggle through it. But it turns out that in a given year, the typical American, should they actually care to read and understand the privacy policies they mostly skip, would spend 76 days of that year reading. So that's the governance structure we are currently under when it comes to how we relate to data. And that struck us as maybe a big opportunity to reframe. Could we create a way of understanding this governance structure that wasn't just tens of thousands of pages of text? That was what we set out to tackle. That's the core of the project. So the idea was pretty simple at one level, but complex at another. Let's turn the terms of service and privacy policies of these technology companies into something visual, because we are visual creatures. We spent hundreds of millions of years evolving these eyes and ears. Maybe there's a better way of comprehending these terms of service and privacy policies than actually trying to read them. But it turns out that it was very complex. Simple idea, complex execution. And you can see, as I scroll down, these are all these connections between the various data points in terms of service and privacy policies for only 4 companies. Whoops, look at that. I just simplified it. Is that you, Juan? How did you do that? Click anywhere. Reset filters. There we go. So the idea was, how can we structure a visualization that might help us draw some insights? Now, we initially were pretty ambitious, thinking we could do this for a lot of different companies, but we realized that would be impossible. So we started with the biggest 4. And I proposed this to Dean Jano a little over a year ago, and I said, would this be an idea that you might be interested in? And thank God she was crazy enough to support our work, so thank you so much. But we realized we needed help, so I also spoke with Mark Hansen, who's here at the Brown Institute, the Graduate School of Journalism, journalism is kind of where I come from and it's where my heart and soul resides. And he was kind enough to loan Juan to us, who is going to show you a few things later on. And also a couple of our research associates who come from the School of Journalism. And I interviewed dozens of candidates, and the team is extraordinary, and they stuck with us for the whole year to pull this off. And so many more of you have helped me, so thank you. We got to work early this year, and as you will hear from others, the work was not straightforward. This visualization is now live at mappingdataflows.com. I do not suggest you look at it on your phone. The reason is all the data will get pushed into that tiny screen and it will look like a big white chalk line. And this is a very nuanced visualization where you need to to interact with it in order to pull insights out. And to be honest, that's one of our frustrations with it, is we managed to get it this far, but we have so much further to go, and we want you to help us understand where we can go from here, and maybe some structural, missteps or errors we've made in some of our assumptions in how we visualized it. But while Juan will give you a little more detail, you can see that essentially what we've done is, from your left to right, we've categorized all the sources of where these companies extract data according to their policies, what we're calling harvesting of the data. And then in the center, what types of data that is. So for example, it's taken from from a cell tower, and it's a location, right? So that's the first two. And then the last column over there is the purpose of the collection data. Again, all of these are drawn from the terms of service and the privacy policies. So what we attempted to do was turn all of those words into actual discrete entries into a database that we could then visualize. We ran into a lot of problems. For example, they don't all use the same terminology for the same thing, right? And this is a standard data science problem, right? Is how do you actually, well, when they say A, do they mean B or C or K? That was one of the things. But I want to show you just one example before I turn it over to Juan. From this, what looks like an sort of beautiful web of data, but very hard to pull any insights from just this. If you pick, say, a company like Apple, and you want to compare it to a company like, say, Google, on the purpose of, say, advertising, what you learn here on your right is that Apple actually collects and uses more data for advertising than Google. Who would have thought? Because Apple's the company that protects you and keeps your privacy safe, and Google's the big evil advertising company. So that's the kind of insight you can pull out if you actually spend time in the visualization. But it takes some work, and that's what we're asking from you, is to ask these interesting questions and spend some time with this offline, preferably on your favorite big screen computer. So the team will show you more insights like this shortly, but first, a few generalized insights that we pulled from the work of the past year. First, these documents are very complex, as I said. And second, and this was maddening, they are incredibly vague. In fact, when Natasha on our team ran some of these terms of service through some word processing software, some advanced processing software, for terms that use the conditional tense, some of them actually hit 60% of words that could be interpreted conditionally. We may use these data for these purposes. And of course, the sort of what a human being does is like, well, they may not. No, they may. As in, they can, and they likely will. And so may isn't, we use this data for exactly this purpose. It's like, we may use it for this or for that, and then they'll give you sort of a harmless reason that makes you feel good about it. But you forget that when you have a vague term like that, they can do pretty much anything they want. These terms of services were not written to be understood by mere mortals. As a matter of fact, they were written to be defended in a court of law by lawyers. That's what they were written for. And so that, thankfully, we have someone, Zoe on our team, who's a paralegal for several years and who understands all of this stuff. And that wasn't by chance that we had that experience on our team. Another insight is that while all of the terms of service did vary from all four companies, in terms of their terminology, their structure, their approach to how they sort of broke down telling consumers what they were doing. What did not vary was they all granted almost exactly the same rights to the companies. They were vastly similar in the breadth of what companies are able to do with the information. And lastly, as you'll see from our case studies, reality is not always perception. So our assumptions about how these companies look and feel are not always what the terms lay out. And you'll see a case study relating to Apple again from that. But probably the biggest insight that we gained was that we're just scratching the surface. That the idea of turning this information into a database that can be visualized and from which insights can be pulled is a good idea. But we're just at the beginning of figuring out how to make this into a much better idea. And this is the first presentation of our work, so we're hoping that you can help us with that, not only today, but by sending us email or coming up to us in the hallways and saying, I've got an idea for how we can work together, make this better, collaborate, whatever it might be. So now please welcome Juan from our team, who is from the Brown Institute, and he's going to take you on a little bit deeper dive through this visualization. Let me reset it for you here.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Dean Jano. So what I want to do is just do a drive through the visualization, exploring some of the things you can do with it, and talking a little bit of the reasons why we coded it this way. As John said, it's mainly divided into 3 columns: data sources on the left-hand side, types of data in the middle, and collection purposes. So the first thing that you can do with this is select individual nodes. For example, here I'm selecting active product use, so the data that you generate by using whatever it is you're using. And that generates behaviors on devices, biometrics, message logs, contact information, so all of these data types. And those data types are collected on the right-hand side for advertising purposes, for security reasons, for any purpose, which is something that companies mention in their policies. You can also select individual lines, right? From active product use to behavior on devices. So that way you can start sort of drilling into the data and isolating specific data sources or specific data types or even collection purposes. Another thing that's interesting to note or useful to note is that when we first coded this data, we came up with hundreds of data types and hundreds of purposes. And we coded the visualization, and it was, if this is a mess, it was a much, much larger mess. And so what we did through multiple rounds was consolidate the data. So when you click on a type of data, for example, or in a purpose, you will see a little bit an explanation that appears underneath. Here I just clicked on camera information, and it says it includes your camera settings and the camera type. So these are 2 other data types, more specific, that are included in this larger node. Same thing with the purposes. If you click on analytics, for example, it includes algorithms, measuring performance, and processing search terms. So we invite you to really drill down into the individual nodes so that you can actually understand everything that's included in there. And this was a debate that we had amongst the team members. How granular do we want it to be in order to really convey what's happening versus how general we want it to be in order to show the big picture. So by clicking on the individual nodes or the individual lines, you can actually drill down and hopefully get some of that granularity. The other thing that you can do is to start filtering the data. The first filter is the company filter. So you can select Amazon, Apple, Facebook, or Google, and you see that the visualization doesn't change that much. And this is precisely what John was saying, that overall, these companies are all very similar in what they collect and what they use that data for. But you can also filter by types of data. So for example, you can say, only show me non-personal information. And it will filter that column in the middle to only show you that. Or only show me location or product use. You can also filter by collection purpose. Why are they collecting this information? So advertising, analytics, operations, or research and development, or the other reasons that they give. And you can filter by collection method. So is the data user provided? So are you actually inputting my name, my address, my zip code? Or is it harvested? Like location. You're not inputting your location. The companies are collecting that automatically. Your phone is automatically generating location data, and the companies are automatically collecting it. Or from third parties. Is somebody else providing data about you to these companies? Finally, as John mentioned, as John did, you can select different companies and compare them. Now, one clarification I have to make here is that so for example, in this one, I'm comparing Amazon versus Facebook. Amazon will be in blue, Facebook will be in red. The white lines that you see there are data types are collected by both companies. So the blue ones are only Amazon, the red ones are only Facebook, and the white are both companies. And you can reset the filters here on the right. I also invite you to look at what we've posted at the bottom of the visualization, which includes all of the links to the different policies that we looked at, as well as our data sets. We wanted to share this with everybody and hopefully get a lot of feedback or other works that use our own data. So we posted the data sets here. They're divided into three very simple CSV files. And you can also find links to the tools that we use to create the visualization. Just on an aside, we also use Google Analytics, which is a little bit ironic because we're actually helping Google gather data about you. We use it so that we can understand how many people are coming to the site and what they're doing. We promise not to do anything nefarious with that. We can't speak on behalf of Google, so we don't know what they will do on behalf with your data. But there is a little disclaimer there. Am I missing anything? I think that's it. Thank you.
We would have been lost without Juan, so thank you. All right, so very, very brief, you'll see these yellow case studies down here. We thought it might be interesting to identify a number of sort of more specific insights that came out of our work. And each of these insights were written up by one of our research associates. So they're going to very briefly give you an overview of those. And we're going to start with Zoe Martin from SIPA.
Thank you, everyone. So we're going to start with Say No Evil, but Keep Your Options Open. This is about Apple. And as most of you know, Apple takes a pain to talk about how they go above and beyond with regard to privacy and they protect users' data. But when we went through its privacy policy, we found that it's very vague and open to interpretation. And in fact, so this is showing all of the non-personal data they collect. And in their privacy policy, they say that they may collect, use, transfer, and disclose non-personal data for any purpose. Any purpose. That's basically everything you do on or with your phone, just with your name and phone number cut out, and they can use it for basically literally whatever they want. In addition to that, when it comes to your personal data, Apple says in their policy that they can use personal data to create, develop, operate, deliver, and improve their products, services, content, and advertising, which is also pretty much everything that they can do with your data. So they may take a lot of precautions to protect their data, and they may talk about it a lot, but they can actually do almost anything with it. So this is important because, as John mentioned, I'm a paralegal, so I did some case research, and Apple is relying on their privacy policies being vague because it holds up in court. They were actually sued in 2013 by a group of people who said they relied on Apple's privacy claims without knowing what they were actually doing with their data, and if they had known, they wouldn't have bought their phones. And Apple argued that none of these people could actually prove that they read the privacy policy. There was no data, they could never remember reading it, and therefore they couldn't have been misled by the privacy policy. So the case was thrown out, and Apple didn't have to change anything. So basically, Apple and most of the tech industry is relying on the fact that customers don't actually read or understand their privacy policies, and the fact that they can do pretty much whatever they want will hold up in court either way.
I'm waiting for an email from Apple PR. Next up is Veronica Penney from the J School.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to walk you through a Facebook case study. This is the illusion of privacy settings. And we're just going to talk a little bit about if you want to limit through Facebook's actual privacy settings or your device settings what Facebook is collecting. This will kind of show you how much you can accomplish. So to start off, what you're seeing right now is all the different types of data that Facebook collects just normally if you're not limiting any privacy settings. And then when I click this button, you'll see some of these lines here on this right side of the screen disappear, and everything that disappears can be controlled if you lock down your privacy settings. If you max them all the way out, those lines will disappear, and what's left is what still gets through. And you can see that pretty much everything still gets through. So what disappeared here is some of the location data, as well as some of the pieces that are used for ad personalization within Facebook. Things like GPS, you can definitely limit on your phone, but when you limit GPS, Facebook can still tell exactly where you are using your IP address, triangulating between mobile towers, using things like the networks that you're connected to or other smart devices that you're around. And then just to quickly touch on personally identifiable information again, that includes your name, your date of birth, social security number, your address, things that can tell a company exactly who you are and where you live. There are generally protections around that, and Facebook says that they won't share personally identifiable information with outside companies for any reason, but that still leaves a lot of data up for grabs that can still tell an outside company or a third party a lot about you. So there is a story, it's from several years back, about a father who found out his daughter was pregnant because Target was sending her ads for baby products. And that speaks to the power of big data. Little things like changes in user behavior, which is here, can be tracked through behavior on your devices, location, anything that can really, oh, sorry, that disappeared. Let me go back through here. Whee. All right. That's all stuff. Basically what's being shown here is things that Facebook can share with a third party or outside company for any purpose, and it could tell a company like Target whether or not you're pregnant. So just something to be aware of, that non-personally identifiable information, at least with Facebook, you can't control it. It can get through no matter what, and they pretty much know everything about you.
It's as if we planned this, but a personal story now from Natasha Bhuta, also from SIPA.
Hi, everyone. So how many of you have gotten the feeling that Facebook is listening to you? A lot of you, I can see. So I also get that feeling, and I certainly consider myself to be a light user of Facebook. The way that I interact with the platform is mostly through clicking, scrolling, but I don't really add data. So I don't, upload videos, photos. I don't really post things. But I do get the sense that they're advertising to me based off of data that they're getting from somewhere else. And it's obvious that this data mirrors things that I talk about with people in my own life. So a really clear example of this was when I was speaking to someone I had been dating for about 6 months. We were each other's only mutual friends. We didn't post on each other's walls. We were very non-active on the Facebook platform. And he mentioned to me that he was considering moving to Boerum Hill. And I remember being distinctly annoyed at this because I was thinking about how my commute from downtown Manhattan to Columbia was now getting lengthened by this commute to somewhere in Brooklyn that I had never heard about. And so we left it at that. But before I even had a chance to actually see where this place was, I was served an ad by Facebook about gyms in Borum Hill. And that certainly made me feel like I was bugged. But as we've continued our research, the more we've dug into this, how does Facebook actually get this information, we realize that they have way better tools than just a microphone to gather this information. They track what we click on, share, buy, search online. And they're also able to, in parallel, see who we're close to and gather this information in a variety of ways, as Veronica mentioned. Who connects to the same Wi-Fi, what devices are near each other. And they can use that to bucket us together and create inferences. Our activity online tends to mirror what we talk about with our close connections. Their algorithms are able to draw inferences about us and what's relevant to us with startling precision, without even needing to bug us. So we can't say for sure that they aren't using your microphone, but this data that they're able to harvest is certainly something that's very powerful.
Natashas Story reminded me that while there's a lot of data up here, it's a very small subset of the actual number of terms of service and privacy policies related to these 4 companies. We only used a sampling, the main privacy policy, the main terms of service, and a couple of adjacent ones that seemed important for each company. There are dozens more just for those 4 companies. So for example, we did not use or incorporate into this visualization the terms of service for the Google Home or the Amazon Alexa or the Facebook portal. So it's possible to do everything Natasha just said without any of that, but just add that and then figure how we feel about it. I've got 3 of them in my house. All right, next up, and bringing us home is Matthew Albasi, also from the J School.
Thanks, everyone. So when we were looking for, we spent a lot of time very close to this data, and it's, when you're just inches away, sometimes it's difficult to see the overall pattern. So we wanted to find something that allowed us to sort of test some of our assumptions. And luckily, Yahoo News came to the rescue with a very timely story. But we'll get to that in a second. First, like John had said, there's so much specificity in these documents, but at the same time, there's so much that is left up to the imagination. Where in the case of Amazon, you have them saying, we receive and store any information you enter on our website or give us in any other way. So in that case, it's pretty clear what they're going to take from you and what they're going to use it for, whatever you give them and whatever they want. But what does it look like in practice? What can they actually turn this into? Well, we saw when Crystal Hugh reported from Yahoo Finance reported that insiders at Amazon had access to various data sets from the marketplaces, including lists of top-selling and trending products in certain categories, pricing points, return data, and reviews. They'd use this to build prototypes, set their price point, and release new products as Amazon Basics or one of their other brands. And so we wanted to see, well, does the terms of service let them do that? And in fact, it really does. Oops. The active product use, the third-party data, information collected from brokers and devices, these can all be used for research and development. You can see in the bottom right-hand side. So then my question became, well, can I do that? I mean, that information is all on Amazon, right? Can I harvest that information from Amazon and make my own product to sell? And if you go into the conditions of use, you can see down here that no, you can't, because by using their product, you agree to use it by their terms. And their terms in this case are that you can't use any aggregate data from the website, and you can't collect that data, whether it's by hiring a team full of master's candidates or with a computer program that does it automatically. So Amazon is very clearly saying, do as I say, not as I do. Thank you.
I now have no friends in the tech industry. All the information in the case studies are up here. As a matter of fact, we also have a brief, it's only 12 pages, a brief white paper that we just posted as well, which goes into a lot more of the details from our research, our methodology, our data sources, our insights, and our plea for your help for input. All that's on the site. As a matter of fact, we should probably put an email in there for feedback. Do we have let's put in an email for like feedback@mappingdataflows.com or something like that, so you can send us stuff. But that's the end of our formal presentation. And so we now want you to ask us questions, which hopefully we can't answer. Those are the best ones. Yeah, and mics will come to you. And I'm told we have a ringer. First question from Professor Hansen.
Thank you. So this is great work, and congratulations. I know it's hard to. I've been sitting across from Juan and hearing about how hard it is to pull categories from unstructured data like these. So I feel your pain in creating something like this. But thank you. So I have two questions that should be pretty straightforward. The first are that the inputs on the left are certainly a function of the software and hardware advances. So inputs. So as GPS is available, suddenly we can add that to the data set. And so I'm interested in maybe temporal aspects of this visualization.
Yeah.
So how do things change over time? What did these look like 10 years ago? And do they co-evolve, right? One company saying, oh, that's a good idea, and moving forward.
Right.
And maybe even does it ripple back onto smaller companies that don't have lawyers who just simply copy terms of use? The second question was, your discussion started with regulation and suggested that there are harms implicit in data collection, perhaps exceedances that suggest pulling these companies back. So is there a column on the right that tells stories of harm from the data that have been collected, and could this maybe be a participatory component of the project where you ask people for?
That's a great idea. Yes. Okay. I'll do my best at answering those two, and if you guys have anything to add that I've missed, tell me. But on the idea of rippling back and forth in the industry, I've started 7 companies over the past 25 years, all of which have had online privacy in terms of services. None of them have gotten to the scale of these 4, but some of them have gotten to hundreds of millions of folks who use them. And I will tell you that when we started with 100 people using them, the way we did terms of service and privacy policies is we cut and paste from others. We literally would go to the privacy policies of Google and cut, because what startup has $100,000 to pay a law firm to write you a privacy policy? So in fact, it is very standard within the industry, particularly the tech industry, to just borrow, if you will. And then, Word has a very powerful change and replace, where you change, from Google to Federated Media, which is one of the names of my companies. And then you have a lawyer read through that, and that gets you a bill of only $5,000 or $10,000 as opposed to, 100. And this is very standard. So these terms of service, which are written by an army of white shoe lawyers, become the terms of service for the entire industry. And that's one of the issues. The other piece that we're very eager to lean into, but this will be a multi-year, school collaboration, is that we have a thesis, and this is in the white paper, that these terms of service are incredibly similar to those that govern intellectual property at agribusinesses like Monsanto or at healthcare businesses like Dignity Health. And we've tested that with some people we know in those businesses, and in fact, they're quite similar. So this is not just a case of the tech industry being, the bad guys here, but our entire society has adopted an approach to data flows that is governed by this kind of thinking. And we'd like, to answer your second question about, temporal, like what about how it was a year, 2 years, 10 years ago, and how it will be going forward. We're working with a static data set right now. And we very much, when we began, we're hoping we could be working with a live data set that was paying attention to changes that happened to terms of service in real time and updating the database. That was beyond our scope, as they say, but we don't think it should be beyond the scope of a project like this, for sure. And we're quite certain that the terms of service have been updated many times since we locked the data down for this particular project, and we'd like, going forward, that's one of our key things we want to do, is have some way of updating the data to make sure it's current, because they do change. And then as to your idea on a 4th column, with insights, that's actually a really elegant way of solving for what we have are the insights at the top there. And so, but we had thought maybe we could open commenting on this, and we certainly could add commenting where you can pin a comment to various parts. We haven't done that yet, but it's actually not technically that difficult to do. But I love this idea, and that's something that we'll consider putting in. It's a very, it would be great to have sort of a wiki of ideas as to the insights that might be down a column 4. So thank you. Other questions here?
And my question concerns GDPR, a regulation in Europe, which was supposed to be adopted, and it gives more power to the consumer in terms of that he's allowed to tell the tech companies to delete data and also get insights into what data is collected. My question is in how far this affects the collection of data and what your perspective is on whether it's actually helping the consumer to gain insights. Just from my perspective, I downloaded my data. It's just so much. There's no way I'm going to scroll through all of it.
So the GDPR, she mentioned that prior to getting the mic, but the Generalized Data Protection Regulation was adopted a few years ago in the EU and implemented in the last 2 years, I believe, is the first sort of, sweeping, dramatic, region-wide data protection, governance that's been put into place. And so it's been scrutinized, a lot. And I worked on it for 3 companies that I'm involved with, 2 on the board and 1 of the companies I was running. Complying with GDPR is hard. And, business always says, these regulations, we got to get rid of them. They get in my way. They make it hard for me to, they're costly. They stop me from doing business. That's true of all regulations, certainly true of GDPR. The problem with GDPR is that it is not only is it difficult to comply with and expensive, it's not very effectual. It turns out that if the best companies at complying with these kinds of regulatory frameworks are large companies. So the largest companies got very good at compliance, and smaller companies aren't very good at compliance. And so what we ended up with was essentially a set of regulations that strengthened the large companies and stymied innovation. The second thing with GDPR that I have an issue with is that while it allows and demands that individuals like yourself can download various data sets, it does not demand that those data sets be in any format that can be shared with other people, which essentially means that no one's going to download them because there's no impetus to sharing them and there's no economic reward for sharing them or social capital for sharing them. So while I think it was well-intentioned, I think it's not quite gotten there in terms of being, for example, something that we should hold up as what we should do here in the United States. And in the white paper, there's a few suggestions as to where we might head beyond GDPR. But I think that and by the way, California has essentially gone to GDPR plus with a set of regulations that take effect in January 1st. And as goes California, at least it used to be, as goes California, so goes the country. But as we've seen with fuel emission regulation, that might not be the case anymore. But generally, as goes California, every large company has to comply with that market regulation. And every large company is already GDPR compliant in the United States, including the 4 that we show here. Because they just figured if we do it for Europe, we may as well just do it for everywhere because it protects us. And so all the startups, all the small companies like mine that just started this year, we have to figure out how to get GDPR compliant and California reg compliant by January 1st. And my guess is we won't, which isn't good for anybody. Up here? Yeah, Mike's coming over.
So first of all, thanks for this work. It's great to have someone actually take a look at this terms of service. As Raskin was doing this privacy icons a few years ago that would allow ordinary people to get a summary of that.
Right.
The question I was going to ask is, have you thought about data flows in the other direction? So for example,
Sorry again?
data flows in the other direction. So it's true that our data flows to these companies, but it's also that we get our information, our data, our news from basically a few sources. So for example, my bank account goes through the Google Chrome. My news go to Google Chrome. My email goes to Google Chrome. So, if there was some sort of a infestation attack, whatever, on Google Chrome, someone would basically would be able to manipulate me, right? So, in some sense, there is a precedence. There have been laws that limited the maximum reach of any TV station. That basically prevent this type of a takeover from just one party.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if you've been thinking, or I'm encouraging you to basically think about the concentration of data flows towards us.
Yes, I think it's a very good point. And I think it's that kind of thinking that we need more of as we imagine what the appropriate remedies are for that concentration of power. And as I said earlier, we tend, because we understand, to sort of, to resort to those things we've already done, which is, I think, where we are with antitrust. Well, it worked. Look what happened. We used antitrust to block Microsoft, and we got Google, we got Facebook, we got all this incredible Web 2, all these new companies that wouldn't have existed if Microsoft had become the one window through which you saw the internet, right? Similar to how AOL was kind of that window in the United States for a minute and a half in the late 80s, early 90s. And it's true that by doing that, and by breaking up by breaking up AT&T and offering and creating the baby bells. And that's really the idea that people are talking about now. We're going to have these sort of baby bells, right? It won't be Google. It'll be Google's ad services will be one company. YouTube will be another company. Their search engine will be a fourth company. All their hardware stuff that will be another company. And they won't be able to share data between them. But they will. I'll tell you what they will share. They will share the exact same terms of service. We haven't done anything to fix that. And so all of that information will still be coming through your Chrome browser or onto your device. And so we haven't done anything to address that, and that's exactly what we're getting at in terms of the next steps. In the back over here?
Sorry, I'll take the other side of it. I have content across platforms, right? So I'll take the other side.
Okay.
I would want this information in order to be transformative, direction-looking, planning, strategy, and out of that, I hire more people. I mean, wouldn't I want your right side information so I don't spend, haphazardly? I know exactly where my money's going. I know why it's going there.
Yes.
I know the future of that.
Yes.
My competitors. Wouldn't
Yes.
I want that?
Yes. So, and now we're getting into my own personal point of view here. I think you should have it. I'm assuming you're speaking sort of as a corporate entity. Like, a corporate entity wants access to all this information so it can be extremely efficient, so it can deliver incredible products and services for free, for the most part. Amazon doesn't charge you anything other than what you buy. It's not charging you for the data services that make it possible for you to buy that, for example. And Google's search is free Facebook is free. I love all of that. I was probably the number one cheerleader of this industry from 1987 until about 4 or 5 years ago. But I think because this is non-rivalrous information, it should be possible for that information to flow back to the individual so that that individual can make choices and give it to a different corporate entity. That's where we're stymieing innovation in this economy, is we are not allowing it to flow both ways, that we're siloing it, we're stovepiping it. And so I've argued in my writing that we shouldn't only have innovation at the corporate level where all that is aggregated in one stovepipe, but the individual should be able to do, as GDPR allows, not just the download, but machine readable and information that can be shared with others. This is difficult, but that's why you guys go to SIPA. That's the work to be done. This is an elegant one-line piece of regulation with about 5,000 supporting pages, right? But the one line is machine-readable data portability. That's it. And we don't have that, and I think we should. So, well, one more. Okay, we're running out of time. Well, we're out of time. Sorry. Okay, up in the, sorry, everybody. Up in the front. Well, you're the dean, you know. You.
Okay, so I think what you said is very interesting. I arrived a little later, so I caught part of it. So if I repeat something that was already said, you tell me. I have a simple receipt. When we all know, we just eat all data, and we are in excess of data in the sense that there are so many and we can't eat them all because we don't even receive it, we can see. So what do? You have to starve a little bit. So would be, and if you go through the political process, we see how broken it is, it takes a long time. So what if today we decide, you know what, we all use Google, and me too, and everyone else. Okay, from today we don't use Google any longer for 10 days. Let's begin something like this, like Colombia. I tell you, they listen very fast. There is no problem with the political regulation. So we do something like this because we always said that the power of all this information is in our hand. But at the end, we don't have so much power because we use it. So let's be fresh in our approaches and try something to limit their power. It's so simple. We made a research on Twitter downloads before Trump, and we have the problem that we are collecting still today millions of data of all New York City, and we can't give it to another research unit of Colombia because Twitter limits it. So we can say which data we downloaded it, and they have to go and pay for it.
Right.
This is not possible. That's it.
Well, on specifically with Twitter, let's talk afterwards because I might be able to help. And but generally speaking, the idea that you have is a powerful one, but it's a spark that rarely turns into a raging fire because we just like using this stuff. It's helpful, and so it's hard to get people off of it. But there are movements. My friend Tiffany Schlein is heading up one and just wrote a book about it that have to do with how can we detach, and I think that's an important habit that we can all learn from. Anyways, thank you guys so much for making it through this, and I appreciate the chance to do this. And thanks to this team, incredible team. And thank you, Dean Jana.